When my husband died, I silently kept the inheritance, the beach house and $18 million in savings. That night, my daughter-in-law threw my bags into the street and screamed, "From now on, this house is mine. Go to a nursing home." I just smiled, ready to rewrite the rules and make her pay for her cruelty. The funeral had been 3 weeks ago, yet the house still felt haunted by Harold's absence. Every corner held memories of our 45 years together. The staircase where we'd posed for anniversary photos, the study where he'd built his real estate empire, the kitchen where we'd shared morning coffee, watching the seasons change through the garden window. I moved through these spaces like a ghost myself, touching familiar objects, trying to absorb the fact that he was truly gone. The cancer had been swift, but not merciful. It had, however, given us time for important conversations during those final weeks, conversations that only Harold and I were privy to. "Eleanor," he'd said, holding my hand with surprising strength for someone so ill, "I've arranged everything. The house, the beach property and Martha's Vineyard, the investments, it's all in your name. Has been for years. The $18 million in the main account, too." I remembered how he'd squeezed my hand then, his eyes suddenly sharp with concern. "Don't tell Andrew or Samantha right away. Let everyone process the grief first. Our son, he's a good man, but weak. And Samantha," he'd trailed off, both of us knowing what went unsaid. My daughter-in-law had always been cordial in Harold's presence, but her ambitions simmered just beneath the surface of every interaction. I kept my promise to Harold. After the funeral, I said nothing about the will, about the true ownership of our family mansion where we all lived, Andrew and Samantha with the twins in the East Wing, Harold and I in the main suite. We had always been generous with them, allowing them to live rent-free in our home, providing them with an abundant lifestyle that Andrew's middling position at his father's company couldn't have sustained on its own. Samantha had never worked a day since marrying my son. Instead, she dedicated herself to maintaining her social status, hosting elaborate parties, and decorating and redecorating rooms in our house without consulting me. Harold had always smoothed over these small indignities with his diplomatic charm, but Harold was gone now. The change in Samantha began subtly. A week after the funeral, she rearranged the living room furniture without asking. When I mentioned it, she replied curtly, "The room needed updating, Eleanor. We can't keep living in a time capsule." By the second week, she was instructing the housekeeper to prioritize her requests over mine. "Mrs. Winters, the younger Mrs. Winters, needs this handled immediately," she'd say, throwing meaningful glances my way. Today marked 3 weeks since Harold's passing, and Samantha's behavior had escalated to outright commands. "Eleanor," she called from the dining room, not bothering to look up from her magazine as I passed. "The good china needs to be set out. I'm having the ladies from the club over for lunch tomorrow." "The everyday china would be more appropriate for a casual lunch," I suggested gently. She looked up then, irritation flashing across her perfectly made-up face. "I said the good china. The Limoges set with the gold trim." I paused. That particular set had been a wedding gift from Harold's parents, used only for our most special family occasions. "I'd rather save that set for—" "For what?" Samantha cut in, standing now. "For some mythical special occasion? Harold is gone, Eleanor. Things change, and it's time you understood that." The cruelty in her tone took my breath away, but I maintained my composure. "The Limoges stays in the cabinet, Samantha. You're welcome to use any of the other sets." Something dangerous flickered in her eyes. "You don't get to make those decisions anymore." I turned to leave, unwilling to engage further, when I heard her mutter, "Won't be long before we put you in a home anyway." That night, after dinner, I quietly slipped into Harold's study, now my study, and made a call to Diane, my oldest friend. With her help, I ordered small cameras with audio recording capability to be installed discreetly in the common areas of the mansion the next day while Samantha was at her tennis lesson. Over the following days, the cameras captured exactly what I suspected: Samantha systematically undermining my authority in my own home, making disparaging comments about me to household staff, and worst of all, limiting my time with Oliver and Lily, my beloved grandchildren. "Grandma isn't feeling well," she'd tell them when they asked to spend time with me. "She's very sad about Grandpa and needs to rest. You shouldn't bother her." The twins, only 9 years old and confused by the loss of their grandfather, would nod solemnly and retreat, denied the comfort we might have given each other. I watched and listened through the discreet cameras as Samantha told her friends over cocktails, "The house will need a complete renovation once it's officially ours. Eleanor has such dated taste. I'm thinking of converting her bedroom suite into a proper spa area." I remained silent, gathering evidence, remembering Harold's advice during one of our final conversations. When you hold all the cards, there's no need to show your hand too early. The breaking point came precisely 4 weeks after Harold's death. I had declined Samantha's demand to use the antique Chinese porcelain set, a 5-generation family heirloom, for a casual tennis club luncheon. Her reaction was volcanic. "Who do you think you are to tell me no in this house?" she screamed, her carefully maintained social mask slipping completely. "This mansion belongs to Andrew now. You're just a guest here, a guest who has overstayed her welcome." When I calmly explained the significance of the porcelain and offered an equally elegant alternative, Samantha completely lost control. "I'm sick of your presence, sick of your family treasures and your memories. This is my home now, and you're no longer welcome here." She grabbed my arm, pulling me toward my bedroom, and began throwing my clothes into suitcases. "From now on, this house is mine. Go to a nursing home, go to a hotel, I don't care, but you're leaving today." Andrew arrived home mid-confrontation, his face pale with shock. "What's happening?" he asked weakly. "Your mother is leaving," Samantha declared, her voice suddenly honeyed, though her eyes remained hard. "We've discussed it, and she agrees it's for the best." Andrew looked at me, confusion and guilt warring in his expression. I could have contradicted her then, could have revealed everything, but something held me back. Instead, I simply smiled. A small, knowing smile that momentarily unsettled Samantha. "I understand," I said quietly. "I'll go stay with Diane tonight." As Andrew helped carry my hastily packed bags to the car, avoiding my eyes, I felt not defeat, but a strange, calm certainty. Tomorrow, I would contact Lawrence Bennett, Harold's longtime attorney and our friend. Tomorrow, the cards I'd been holding would finally be revealed, and Samantha would learn the true meaning of consequences. The guest bedroom at Diane's house was smaller than my suite at the mansion, but it offered something I hadn't realized I needed: peace. No critical eyes following my movements, no hushed conversations that stopped when I entered a room, no constant reminders that I was suddenly deemed irrelevant in the life I had helped build. "I still can't believe she threw you out of your own house," Diane said, setting a cup of tea on the nightstand. My oldest friend since college, she had listened to the entire story with increasing indignation. "And Andrew just stood there? Your own son?" "Harold always said Andrew inherited his height, but not his spine," I replied, the familiar ache of disappointment resurfacing. "He's never stood up to Samantha, not once in 10 years of marriage." Diane sat at the edge of the bed. "So what happens now, Eleanor? You can't just let them have the mansion. That house has been in your family for generations." "No," I agreed. "I can't, and I won't." I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Despite the late hour, Lawrence Bennett answered on the second ring. "Eleanor." His voice was warm with concern. "I've been expecting your call. How are you holding up?" "It's time, Lawrence," I said simply. "Can you arrange a meeting at your office tomorrow? With Andrew and Samantha?" "Of course. What should I tell them it's regarding?" "Just say it's about Harold's estate. They'll come." I knew Samantha wouldn't miss what she assumed would be the official transfer of assets to Andrew. "And the documentation we discussed?" Lawrence asked carefully. "Bring everything, and I'll bring the recordings." After ending the call, I slept more soundly than I had since Harold's diagnosis. There was clarity in finally taking action, in honoring not just the legal arrangements Harold had made, but the understanding between us that I would protect what we'd built together. Not just the material assets, but the values they represented. The next morning, I dressed with particular care, a tailored navy suit that Harold had always admired, subtle pearl earrings, and the diamond wedding band that hadn't left my finger in 45 years. Armor of a sort, for the battle ahead. Lawrence's office occupied the top floor of a downtown building with sweeping views of the city where Harold had built his real estate empire. When Diane dropped me off, I spotted Andrew's car already in the parking lot. Samantha would have insisted on arriving early, establishing their presence in what she wrongly assumed was their rightful territory. The receptionist ushered me directly into Lawrence's spacious corner office. Andrew rose awkwardly when I entered, while Samantha remained seated, her posture radiating impatience. She wore a black designer dress that likely cost more than most people's monthly salary, accessorized with the diamond necklace Harold had given me for our 30th anniversary, one I'd foolishly allowed her to borrow for a charity event, and never returned. "Mother," Andrew said stiffly, "you're looking well." "Thank you, Andrew," I replied evenly, taking a seat across from them rather than beside them. A deliberate choice that didn't go unnoticed by Lawrence, who sat behind his imposing mahogany desk, several folders arranged neatly before him. "Shall we get started?" Samantha interjected, not bothering with pleasantries. "We have lunch reservations at the club at 1. Her tone suggested this meeting was a mere formality, a minor inconvenience before she could fully claim what she believed was now hers. Lawrence adjusted his glasses. "Of course, Mrs. Winters. I've called you here to discuss the disposition of Harold's estate, as executed in his final will and testament, which was updated and signed 6 months ago when his diagnosis was confirmed." "We understand the standard procedure," Samantha said, her impatience showing. "As Harold's only son and heir, Andrew naturally inherits the family assets, with appropriate provisions for Eleanor's care, of course." She reached over to pat my hand in a gesture of false concern. "We want to assure you that you'll be comfortable, Eleanor. We've already researched several excellent retirement communities." Lawrence's expression remained neutral as he opened the first folder. "Actually, that's not accurate. Harold's will is quite specific. Eleanor is the sole inheritor of all assets, including the family mansion, the Martha's Vineyard beach house, all investment portfolios totaling approximately $18 million, and controlling interest in Winters' real estate holdings." The silence that followed was absolute. Andrew's mouth opened and closed without sound. Samantha froze, her carefully arranged expression of benevolent patience shattering into confusion, then disbelief. "That's impossible," she finally managed. "The house has been in the Winters family for generations. It passes to the son. That's how these things work." "The mansion was actually purchased by Harold and Eleanor jointly in the first year of their marriage," Lawrence clarified. "It has always been in both their names, with right of survivorship. It now belongs solely to Eleanor." Andrew found his voice at last. "But the company," Dad always said. "Your father maintained majority ownership of the company," Lawrence continued, "with you holding 20%. That majority share now transfers to your mother." Samantha's shock was transforming rapidly into anger, her knuckles white as she gripped her designer handbag. "This is ridiculous. Harold wouldn't leave his son with nothing. There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," I said, speaking for the first time. "Harold and I discussed all of this extensively during his final weeks. He wanted me to have the security and authority to manage the family assets as I see fit." "You manipulated him when he was dying," Samantha accused, her voice rising. "He wasn't in his right mind." Lawrence cleared his throat. "I can personally attest that Harold was completely lucid and determined in his decisions. In fact, he left a video statement explaining his choices, if you'd care to view it." Before Samantha could respond, I opened my purse and removed a small USB drive. "But first, I have something else I'd like to share." I handed the drive to Lawrence, who connected it to his computer and turned the monitor so we could all see. The screen showed our family living room from the perspective of a discreetly placed camera. Samantha appeared, speaking to one of her friends. "Once the old lady is gone, I'm gutting this mausoleum," her recorded voice said clearly. "Andrew will inherit everything, and I'll finally be able to make this house what it should be." Another clip, Samantha instructing the housekeeper to ignore my requests. Another, Samantha telling the twins they couldn't see me because I was unstable with grief. And finally, the confrontation from the previous night, her screaming that the house was hers, physically pushing me toward the door, throwing my possessions into suitcases. As the recording ended, Samantha's face had transformed into a mask of fury and humiliation. "You spied on me? In my own home?" "My home," I corrected quietly, "where you were living by my generosity. A generosity you repaid with cruelty and disrespect." I turned to Lawrence, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I've made some decisions. Please inform Andrew and Samantha that they have 3 weeks to vacate the mansion. I've arranged for them to have access to a 3-bedroom apartment in Riverdale. Not as luxurious as they're accustomed to, but certainly comfortable." "You can't do this," Samantha whispered, shock replacing anger. "The mansion it's everything to me. It's my dream home." Dreams require gratitude, Samantha, not greed, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. You'll receive a monthly allowance, sufficient to live comfortably, but not extravagantly. Approximately half what you've been accustomed to. Half? Her voice rose in panic. How are we supposed to live on half? I met her gaze directly. The same way millions of adults do every day, by working. It's time you found employment and contributed to supporting your family. Andrew, who had been staring at the floor throughout the recordings, finally looked up. His face showed a complexity of emotion, shame, fear, and something else, perhaps the first glimmer of understanding of what his silence had cost. Mom, please, he began, his voice unsteady. The children love that house. They've grown up there. Oliver and Lily will always be welcome to visit me, I assured him. In fact, I plan to spend quality time with them, but you and Samantha have 3 weeks to relocate. As I stood to leave, I felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure, only a weary resolution. This wasn't about punishment, but consequences, not revenge, but justice. Harold had trusted me to protect what we'd built, and I would honor that trust. I'll be staying at Diane's for now, I informed them. I plan to spend some time at the beach house to clear my head. Lawrence will handle the details of your move and the new financial arrangements. Samantha remained frozen in her chair, the reality of her situation still sinking in. Andrew rose awkwardly, looking suddenly older, diminished. I'm sorry, he said softly, the words sounding inadequate even to his own ears. I know you are, I replied. But sometimes, Andrew, sorry isn't enough. The 3 weeks following the meeting in Lawrence's office unfolded like scenes from a play I'd never expected to be part of. From my temporary sanctuary at Diane's house, I watched the drama unfold through updates from Lawrence, the household staff, and occasional glimpses when I visited to collect personal items. Samantha cycled through stages of reaction with theatrical intensity. First came denial. She consulted 3 separate attorneys, all of whom confirmed what Lawrence had told her. The will was ironclad, the mansion legally mine, the financial arrangements entirely within my rights to dictate. Next came bargaining. She left tearful voicemails promising to make things right if only I would reconsider this hasty decision. When these approaches failed, she descended into rage, directing her fury primarily at Andrew, as if he could somehow undo what had been done. You should hear them arguing. Maria, our housekeeper of 20 years, reported when she came to Diane's with some additional clothes I'd requested. Mrs. Samantha, she throws things. Last night it was your crystal vase, the one Mr. Harold gave you for your 40th anniversary. I winced at that. The vase had been hand-blown in Venice during a second honeymoon trip, another casualty of Samantha's entitlement. And Mr. Andrew? I asked, though I could already imagine my son's response. Maria shook her head sadly. He just takes it. Sometimes he tries to calm her down. Mostly he hides in his office with a drink. I sighed, recognizing the pattern. Andrew had always chosen the path of least resistance, preferring to weather Samantha's storms rather than stand against them. It had been the same when the twins were small, and Samantha hired a night nurse against my gentle suggestion that the babies needed their mother. Andrew had shrugged and said, "She needs her sleep, Mom. You know how she gets when she's tired. Always an excuse, always a surrender." On the 10th day after the meeting, I visited the mansion to collect some family photo albums. I timed my visit for when I knew Samantha would be at her standing hair appointment, hoping to avoid a confrontation. Instead, I found Andrew alone in the kitchen, staring into a cup of coffee as if it might contain answers to questions he'd never thought to ask. He startled when I entered, then stood awkwardly. "Mom, I didn't know you were coming by." "Just picking up a few things," I explained, keeping my tone neutral. Up close, I could see the toll the past days had taken on him. Shadows under his eyes, new lines etched around his mouth, the slight tremor in his hand as he set down his cup. "Samantha's meeting with a job counselor today," he offered unexpectedly. "Someone Lawrence recommended." "That's good," I said, genuinely surprised. I hadn't expected her to start looking for work so quickly. Andrew laughed without humor. It wasn't exactly voluntary. The reality of the reduced allowance hit home when she couldn't cover her spa membership renewal. He hesitated, then asked, "How are you doing?" "At Diane's, I mean." The question caught me off guard with its simple humanity. The first time in years he'd inquired about my well-being without Samantha's influence coloring the interaction. "I'm all right," I answered truthfully. It's peaceful there. No one questioning my every decision or rearranging my belongings. Shame crossed his face. I let it happen, he said quietly. All of it. The way she treated you. The way she gradually took over everything. It was easier to go along. Yes, I agreed, not softening the truth. It was easier for you, not for me. He nodded, accepting the rebuke. I keep thinking about Dad. What he would say if he could see how this has all played out. He wouldn't be surprised, I told him. Harold saw people clearly. It's why he structured his will the way he did. He knew Samantha's character, and he knew you wouldn't stand against her without an outside force compelling you to do so. Andrew flinched at my frankness, but didn't deny it. The moving company comes next week. Samantha's furious about the apartment, says it's beneath us. I tried to explain that most people would consider a 3-bedroom in Riverdale quite nice, but he trailed off, and I filled in the unspoken end of his sentence. But Samantha wasn't most people. She measured her worth by square footage and zip codes, by the envy in her friends' eyes when they visited her dream home. She talked about the house all the time, you know, Andrew continued. Even before Dad got sick, how she was going to renovate everything once it was finally ours. I never corrected her assumption that I would inherit it. Did you know the truth? I asked, curious about how much Harold had shared with our son. Andrew shook his head. Not explicitly, but I think I suspected. Dad always said the family's real wealth was in your hands. I thought he was being metaphorical, speaking about your emotional strength. Now I understand he meant it literally. Our conversation was interrupted by the twins bursting into the kitchen, back from their piano lessons with their nanny. Their faces lit up when they saw me, and they rushed forward for hugs I'd been starved for over the past weeks. "Grandma, you're back!" Lily exclaimed, her small arms tight around my waist. "Just visiting, sweetheart," I explained, stroking her hair. "Collecting some photo albums." "Are you going to live with us again after we move?" Oliver asked hopefully. "Dad says we're moving to a new place next week." I glanced at Andrew, who looked away, unable to meet my eyes. He hadn't told them I wouldn't be joining them at the apartment. "I'll be staying at the beach house for a little while," I explained gently. "But you'll come visit me there. We can look for shells and build sandcastles." "But why can't you live with us anymore?" Lily persisted, her 9-year-old sense of justice detecting the wrongness in the situation. "Is it because Mom said those mean things about you?" Andrew's head snapped up at this, and I saw the realization dawn that the children had been more aware of Samantha's behavior than anyone had assumed. "Sometimes grown-ups need space from each other," I said carefully, "but that doesn't change how much I love you both." After promising to call them that evening and arranging a weekend visit to Martha's Vineyard, I gathered my photo albums and prepared to leave. Andrew walked me to the door, lingering awkwardly in the foyer of what had been my home for 4 decades. "Samantha's talking about divorce," he said abruptly, his voice low so the children wouldn't hear. "Says this isn't what she signed up for, that she didn't marry me to live like a common person or work like a servant." I studied my son's face, seeing in it echoes of Harold's features, but none of his strength. "Does that surprise you?" I asked gently. Andrew sighed, deflating further. "No, and that's the saddest part. It doesn't surprise me at all." As I drove back to Diane's, I reflected on the unraveling of my son's marriage, a union I had harbored doubts about from the beginning, but had respected as his choice. Now, faced with the first genuine adversity of their married life, it was crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. I felt no satisfaction in being proven right, only a mother's sorrow for the pain my son would experience, and concern for how it would affect my grandchildren. But beneath that sorrow ran a current of certainty that this necessary unraveling might eventually lead to something healthier, for Andrew, for the twins, and perhaps even for Samantha herself, if she could learn from the experience. That evening, I called Lawrence to discuss the next phase of my plans. It was time to reclaim my home and rebuild what Samantha had tried to destroy, not just the physical space, but the sense of sanctuary it had always represented for our family. Martha's Vineyard welcomed me with open arms, as it had every summer for 30 years. The beach house stood on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, its weathered cedar shingles and blue shutters unchanged since Harold and I had purchased it as a celebration of his first major development success. Unlike the mansion, which had been in Harold's family for generations before we made it our own, This place had always been purely ours, a sanctuary we had created together. I arrived on a Thursday morning, exactly 4 weeks after Harold's funeral. The timing wasn't lost on me. In just 1 month, my life had been completely upended, first by grief and then by betrayal. But as I unlocked the front door and breathed in the familiar scent of sea air and old wood, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't an exile, it was a homecoming. Mrs. Collins, the local woman who looked after the property year-round, had prepared for my arrival. Fresh flowers stood in vases, the refrigerator was stocked with essentials, and a handwritten note welcomed me with warm condolences for Harold's passing. These small kindnesses brought tears to my eyes in a way that Samantha's grand cruelties hadn't managed to do. I spent that first day reacquainting myself with the house, running my hands over surfaces Harold had touched, opening windows to let the sea breeze sweep through rooms that had stood empty since our last visit the previous summer. In the master bedroom, I found Harold's worn flannel robe still hanging on the back of the door. I buried my face in it, searching for his scent, but found only the faint smell of cedar and salt air. That night, I sat on the deck with a glass of wine, watching the waves crash against the shore below. For the first time since Harold's death, I allowed myself to fully feel the magnitude of my loss. Not just the loss of my husband and best friend, but the loss of the family life I had believed we were building, the relationships I had trusted would sustain me in my grief. I didn't expect it to play out this way, I said aloud, imagining Harold beside me as he had been countless evenings before. I knew Samantha was difficult, but I never thought she'd show her hand so completely. The wind carried my words away, but I continued the one-sided conversation, finding comfort in articulating thoughts I'd kept locked inside for weeks. You were right about her, and about Andrew. I should have listened more carefully. I sipped my wine, watching the moonlight dance across the water. But you were also right about me. I'm stronger than I look. I slept deeply that night, lulled by the rhythm of the waves and the emotional release of finally acknowledging the full spectrum of my grief. When I woke the next morning, I felt lighter somehow, more myself than I had since Harold's diagnosis. The twins arrived that weekend, brought by a clearly uncomfortable Andrew who avoided meeting my eyes as he dropped them off. Samantha had refused to come, claiming she was too busy with job interviews to make the trip. The children, however, showed no such reluctance, tumbling from the car with excited shouts and running straight into my waiting arms. "Grandma, your house is right on the ocean," Oliver exclaimed, his eyes wide as he took in the expansive view. "Can we go down to the beach right now?" Lily added, already pulling off her shoes in anticipation. I laughed, my heart filling at their enthusiasm. "After lunch, my darlings. Let's get you settled in first." As I helped them unpack in the twin bedroom that had once belonged to their father, I noticed how subdued they became when mentioning home. "Mom threw another plate yesterday," Lily confided quietly, arranging her stuffed animals on the bed. "She said the apartment is too small for her good china anyway. She and Dad fight all the time now," Oliver added, his young face serious beyond his years. "She keeps saying it's not fair, and he should have protected her, whatever that means." I chose my words carefully, aware of the delicate position the children were in. Sometimes adults have trouble adjusting to changes. Your mom and dad are going through a difficult time, but they both love you very much. Mom says we wouldn't have to move if you weren't being so mean, Lily said, watching my face closely for a reaction. She says you're punishing everyone because you're sad about Grandpa. The directness of children never fails to catch one off guard. I sat on the edge of the bed and gestured for them both to join me. "Your mom is entitled to her opinion," I said gently, "but that's not what's happening. Grandpa and I worked very hard all our lives to build what we have. The mansion, this beach house, the money to take care of our family. These things belong to me now, because that's what Grandpa wanted. I'm not punishing anyone, but I do believe in consequences for how people treat each other." "Like when I'm mean to Oliver and have to apologize and lose screen time?" Lily asked, making the connection with her own experience. "Exactly like that," I confirmed. "But this is a grown-up version with bigger consequences." "Mom was mean to you," Oliver stated matter-of-factly. "We heard her yelling at you that night. She told you to go to a nursing home." I hadn't realized they'd witnessed Samantha's outburst, another failure of parental awareness in that household. Yes, she was, and that hurt my feelings very much. "So she's in timeout now?" Lily suggested, simplifying the situation in a way that made perfect sense from a child's perspective. I smiled despite myself, something like that. The weekend passed in a blur of beach walks, board games, and bedtime stories, normal grandmother activities that felt extraordinary after weeks of being told I was a burden to be disposed of. The twins flourished under the simple attention I provided, their natural exuberance returning after being subdued by the tense atmosphere at home. When Andrew came to collect them Sunday evening, I invited him in for coffee. He hesitated on the threshold, looking around the beach house with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I'd forgotten how beautiful it is here," he said finally, following me to the kitchen. "Dad and I used to fish off those rocks before sunrise. Remember?" "Of course I do," I replied, setting out mugs. "You caught your first striped bass when you were 8. Harold was so proud he called everyone we knew." A ghost of a smile crossed Andrew's face. "Those were good days." "They were," I agreed, studying my son as I prepared the coffee. He looked marginally better than he had the last time I'd seen him. Less haunted, more present. "How is the move progressing?" "It's done," he said with a sigh. "We're in the apartment now. It's an adjustment." "And Samantha?" Andrew's expression closed. "She had her first day as a receptionist at Blackwell Real Estate yesterday. Dad's biggest competitor, ironically. She came home in tears, said the office manager was cruel, and the work beneath her capabilities. The first day of any job is challenging, I observed neutrally, though I couldn't help thinking that a woman who'd spent a decade attending spas and charity luncheons might indeed find regular employment a shock to her system. "She's still talking about divorce," he added, his voice carefully even. "Says she didn't sign up for this downgrade in lifestyle, that she deserves better." I set his coffee before him, choosing my response with care. "What do you think you deserve, Andrew?" The question seemed to startle him. "I don't know anymore," he admitted after a long pause. "I used to think I deserved everything Dad built, the mansion, the company leadership, the respect that comes with the Winters name. Now I'm not sure I earned any of it." It was the most self-aware statement I'd heard from my son in years. Rather than filling the silence that followed, I let him sit with that realization, watching as he gazed out at the ocean through the kitchen window. "The twins seem happy here," he said finally, changing the subject. "More like themselves than they've been in weeks." "Children are resilient when given stability and love," I replied. "They're welcome here any time. I hope you know that includes you, Andrew." He met my eyes then, his own shining with unshed tears. "Even after everything, after I let Samantha treat you that way, after I stood by while she threw you out of your own home, you're still my son," I said simply. "I'm disappointed in your choices, but that doesn't erase a lifetime of love." As he left with the twins, extracting promises from me to call them every evening, I watched from the porch until their car disappeared down the winding coastal road. The weekend had been healing in ways I hadn't anticipated, not just for the children, but for me as well. In their uncomplicated affection, I had found something I'd been missing since Harold's death: purpose. That night, I called Lawrence with a decision. It was time to return to the mansion, not because Samantha's cruelty had been forgiven or forgotten, but because I refused to remain exiled from the home Harold and I had built together. Our legacy deserved better than that, and so did I. The mansion loomed before me, grand and familiar, yet somehow different now that I approached it as a returning owner rather than an evicted matriarch. It had been exactly 6 weeks since Harold's funeral, 5 weeks since Samantha had thrown my belongings into the street, and 1 week since she and Andrew had vacated the premises for their more modest apartment in Riverdale. Lawrence had arranged for a thorough cleaning after their departure, but as I turned my key in the lock and stepped into the foyer, I could still feel the lingering tension in the air, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the drama of recent weeks. "Welcome home, Mrs. Winters," Maria greeted me, appearing from the kitchen with a tentative smile. She had stayed on when I offered her continued employment, one of the few staff members who had consistently treated me with respect, even during Samantha's reign. "Everything is ready for you." "Thank you, Maria," I replied, setting down my handbag and taking in the space with fresh eyes. The grand staircase still curved elegantly upward. The antique Persian rug still covered the marble floor. The crystal chandelier still caught the afternoon light. Yet subtle changes marked Samantha's brief authority. The family photos that had once lined the hallway were missing. The antique side table Harold's mother had given us had been replaced with a sleeker modern piece, and the warm cream walls had been repainted a stark white that felt clinical rather than welcoming. Mrs. Samantha made some changes before she knew. Maria trailed off diplomatically. Before she knew she'd be leaving so soon, I finished for her. It's all right, Maria. The house has survived far worse than a few cosmetic alterations. I moved from room to room, cataloging the changes, noting what could be restored and what might be reimagined. In the living room, the family portraits had been removed from above the fireplace, replaced by an abstract canvas in cold blues and grays. The dining room had been largely spared, though my grandmother's lace table runner was nowhere to be seen. The kitchen remained functional but sterile, lacking the warmth of the copper pots and family recipe books that had once made it the heart of our home. It wasn't until I reached the master bedroom that the true extent of Samantha's presumption became clear. The room had been completely transformed, my antique vanity replaced by a modern dressing table, the handcrafted quilt Harold's grandmother had made for our wedding nowhere to be seen, the walls now painted a dark charcoal that shrunk the once airy space. "She moved in here the day after you left," Maria explained from the doorway, her disapproval evident despite her professional restraint. "Said the master suite should belong to the new Mrs. Winters." I ran my hand over the unfamiliar bedspread, a sleek gray satin that felt cold to the touch. "And my things?" "Most were put in storage in the east wing," Maria said, "though some items disappeared." I nodded, unsurprised but still disappointed. "We'll sort it out, Maria, one room at a time." Over the next few days, I reclaimed my home methodically. I restored family photographs to their places of honor, retrieved treasured heirlooms from hastily packed boxes, and gradually erased the most jarring evidence of Samantha's brief tenure. The master bedroom required the most work, returning it to a space where I could sleep without feeling like a visitor in my own home. As I worked, I found unexpected comfort in the physical labor of restoration. Each picture rehung, each heirloom reclaimed, each room repainted in the warm tones I preferred. All were acts of healing, of re-establishing my place in the world after the twin upheavals of Harold's death and Samantha's betrayal. A week after my return, I invited Diane over for dinner to celebrate my homecoming. We sat in the newly restored dining room, the table set with my grandmother's lace runner, found stuffed in a linen closet, and the everyday china that Samantha had deemed insufficiently impressive. "It feels like you again in here," Diane observed, looking around appreciatively. For a while there, it was like the house had lost its soul. "That's exactly how it felt," I agreed, pouring us each another glass of wine. As if she was systematically erasing any trace of me, of us, to make room for her vision of what a Winters home should be. "Have you heard from them?" Diane asked, always direct in her inquiries. "Andrew brings the twins to visit every weekend," I replied. "They're adapting well to the apartment, though they miss the garden. Lily says her new room is cozy, which is 9-year-old code for small but acceptable." "And Samantha?" I sighed, setting down my glass. "Still working as a receptionist, still furious about the downgrade in her lifestyle, still blaming everyone but herself for the situation." I paused, considering how much to share. "Andrew says she's been pressuring him to contest the will, find some legal loophole. Her latest theory is that Harold wasn't mentally competent when he updated it." Diane snorted inelegantly. "Harold Winters was sharp as a tack until the very end. Any lawyer with half a brain would laugh her out of their office." "Lawrence assured me the same," I confirmed. "But it's another strain on their marriage, another grievance for her to nurture." The conversation shifted to pleasanter topics as we finished our meal, but later that evening, after Diane had left, I found myself standing in Harold's study, the one room I had left largely untouched since his death. His presence felt strongest here among his books and papers, in the leather chair worn smooth by decades of use, beside the chess set where we'd played countless games on winter evenings. I sat at his desk and opened the top drawer, where I knew he kept his most personal items. Among them was a sealed envelope with my name written in his distinctive handwriting. I'd discovered it shortly after his death, but hadn't found the courage to open it until now. Inside was a single sheet of his personal stationery, covered in his bold script. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, I've left you to navigate this world alone, something I promised I would never do. For that, I am profoundly sorry. I've arranged our affairs as best I could, placing everything in your capable hands. Some may question this decision, particularly those who've underestimated you all these years. They see only the gracious hostess, the supportive wife, the doting grandmother. They don't see what I've always known, that beneath your gentle exterior lies a core of steel. Andrew will struggle with this transition. His weakness has always been his unwillingness to stand firm when challenged, particularly by Samantha. I fear her influence has diminished the man he might have become. Perhaps, freed from my shadow and faced with genuine consequences, he might finally grow into his potential. One can hope. As for Samantha, I've never trusted her motives, nor her character. She married our son for the Winter's name, and all it represents, not for love of the man himself. I suspect that when truly tested, her true nature will reveal itself, and when it does, you must be prepared to protect yourself and our legacy. I leave all this in your hands, not as a burden, but as an acknowledgement of your strength. For 45 years, you have been my partner in all things, the foundation upon which everything else was built. The world may see my name on buildings and business ventures, but you and I know the truth. None of it would exist without you. All my love, now and always, Harold. I pressed the letter to my heart, tears flowing freely for the first time since the funeral. Harold had known, of course he had known, exactly how events would unfold. He had seen through Samantha's facade of respect, anticipated Andrew's failure to stand up for what was right, and prepared me as best he could for the challenges that would follow his death. More importantly, he had seen me, truly seen me, not just as his wife, or the mother of his child, or the grandmother of his grandchildren, but as a woman of substance and capability, worthy of carrying forward everything we had built together. As I carefully refolded the letter and returned it to the envelope, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The house around me was still in transition, bearing the scars of Samantha's brief authority and my ongoing restoration. But it was mine again, not just legally, but spiritually, and I would make it a home once more, for myself, for the twins, and for Harold's memory. 2 months after reclaiming the mansion, I had settled into a new rhythm. The twins spent every weekend with me, bringing laughter back to rooms that had grown too quiet. I hosted a monthly bridge club that evolved into an informal support group for widows, navigating the unexpected complexities of life after loss. Twice weekly, I volunteered at the Children's Hospital, where Harold had been a major donor, reading to patients too ill to leave their beds. Life wasn't the same as before. How could it be? But it had purpose and meaning again, anchored by the responsibilities Harold had entrusted to me and the relationships I was consciously nurturing. One Tuesday morning, Lawrence called with news I hadn't anticipated. "Eleanor," he began after our usual pleasantries, "Andrew has requested a meeting. He asked specifically that I be present along with the financial advisors." "Is there a problem with the allowance arrangements?" I asked, instantly concerned despite myself. Though reduced from their previous lifestyle, the monthly sum I provided was still generous, more than enough for a comfortable life, if managed sensibly. "He didn't specify," Lawrence replied, "just said it concerned the family business and his future role." He sounded different, more focused than I've heard him in years. Curiosity piqued, I agreed to the meeting. 2 days later, I found myself in the conference room at Winter's Real Estate Holdings, where Harold had conducted business for decades. Andrew was already seated when I arrived, dressed in a crisply tailored suit, rather than the more casual attire he'd favored since his father's death. The change was subtle but noticeable, like a boy who had finally decided to dress like the man he was supposed to be. "Mother," he greeted me, standing as I entered. "Thank you for coming." Lawrence arrived moments later, followed by Harold's longtime financial advisor and the company's CFO. Once everyone was settled, Andrew surprised me by taking control of the meeting with an authority I'd rarely seen him exhibit. "I've asked you all here because I have a proposal regarding my future with Winter's Real Estate," he began, his voice steady. "For 15 years, I've worked at this company without truly earning my position. Dad gave me a title and responsibilities, but we all know I was never the executive he hoped I would be." The frankness of this admission caught everyone off guard. Andrew had always defended his place in the company, insisting he was contributing value despite evidence to the contrary. Recent events have forced me to reevaluate many things, he continued. My role in the company, my responsibilities to my family, and most importantly, the kind of man I want to be. Here he glanced at me briefly. I've spent 2 months studying every aspect of our current projects, meeting with department heads, and reviewing financial projections. With the help of the CFO, I've developed a detailed proposal for my continued involvement with the company. He distributed folders containing meticulously prepared documents, financial projections, organizational charts, and a detailed business plan. As I skimmed the contents, I realized with growing amazement that this was no hastily assembled presentation. Andrew had clearly invested significant time and thought into these proposals. In essence, he summarized, I'm proposing to step down as Executive Vice President and instead take on the role of Project Development Manager for our new Riverfront initiative. It's a position I'm actually qualified for, with clearly defined responsibilities and measurable outcomes. My compensation would be adjusted accordingly, salary commensurate with the role plus a performance-based bonus structure that rewards actual results, not just my last name. Lawrence raised an eyebrow. This would be a significant step down in both title and compensation, Andrew. Yes, Andrew agreed simply, because it's the right thing to do. I haven't earned the executive position, and continuing to occupy it doesn't serve the company or my own development. As the financial advisors peppered him with questions, Andrew answered with unexpected competence, demonstrating a grasp of the business that I'd never witnessed before. He had clearly done his homework, prepared for every objection, and thought through the implications of his proposal from multiple angles. When the discussion turned technical, I found myself observing my son with new eyes. Physically, he resembled Harold, the same height, the same strong jawline, the same way of gesturing with his hands when making an important point. But the substance I'd always found lacking in Andrew was suddenly, surprisingly present. Something fundamental had shifted. After nearly an hour of detailed discussion, the financial team seemed cautiously supportive of Andrew's plan. Lawrence, ever the practical voice, turned to me. As majority shareholder, the final decision rests with you, Eleanor. What are your thoughts? All eyes turned to me. In that moment, I thought of Harold's letter, his hope that Andrew might finally grow into his potential when faced with genuine consequences. Was this the beginning of that growth? I'd like to speak with Andrew privately before making my decision, I replied. The others filed out, leaving Andrew and me alone in the conference room that still held echoes of Harold's presence in its rich mahogany furnishings and the portrait hanging on the far wall. This is unexpected, I said once we were alone. What prompted such a dramatic reassessment? Andrew met my gaze directly, another change from the man who had often avoided eye contact during difficult conversations. Losing the mansion was the wake-up call I needed, he admitted. For the first time in my life, I faced real consequences for my choices, or rather, for my lack of choices, my unwillingness to take a stand. He paused, gathering his thoughts. When Samantha threw your belongings out and I stood there doing nothing, I betrayed not just you, but myself. I became someone I couldn't respect. And now, I prompted gently, now I'm trying to rebuild that respect, starting with being honest about my capabilities and limitations. I'm not the business visionary Dad was, and pretending otherwise serves no one, but I do have some skills that could be valuable in the right role. What about Samantha? I asked, the question that had hovered unspoken throughout the meeting. How does she feel about this proposed adjustment? A shadow crossed Andrew's face. She moved out last week, said she didn't sign up to be married to a mid-level manager. The divorce papers arrived yesterday. Though I had anticipated this outcome, hearing it confirmed still brought a pang of sadness, not for the loss of Samantha as a daughter-in-law, but for the pain Andrew and the twins would experience as their family reconfigured itself. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. The children? Confused but adapting. They'll stay with me primarily, with Samantha having weekend visits once she gets settled, as she puts it. His mouth tightened. Apparently, she has a friend with connections in real estate development in Chicago. She's relocating there next month. Says there's nothing left for her here now that the Winters name doesn't come with the lifestyle she expected. I wasn't surprised by Samantha's priorities, but I was surprised by Andrew's clear-eyed assessment of them. The son who had always made excuses for his wife's behavior was finally seeing her without illusions. And how are you really? I asked, setting aside the business proposal to focus on the man before me, my only child, now navigating his own painful transition. Andrew considered the question seriously. Oddly relieved, he admitted. The apartment feels more like home without the constant tension. The twins laugh more freely, and I'm finding that I actually enjoy being a hands-on father without Samantha micromanaging every interaction. He smiled faintly. I made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs this morning. Lily declared them the best breakfast ever, even though they were barely recognizable as reptiles. I found myself smiling in return, glimpsing the Andrew I remembered from before his marriage, more light-hearted, more authentic. As for your proposal, I said, returning to the business at hand, I'm inclined to approve it with one modification, which is, I want quarterly reviews of your performance in this new role, conducted by an independent evaluator. If you meet or exceed expectations for 2 consecutive quarters, we'll discuss a path for gradual increase in responsibilities, earned advancement rather than entitled inheritance. Andrew nodded, his expression serious but hopeful. That seems fair. More than fair, actually. As we stood to conclude our meeting, he hesitated, then asked, Would you consider having dinner with us this Friday? At the apartment? The twins miss you and I... He paused, uncharacteristically vulnerable. I could use some advice on being a single parent. I'd be honored, I replied, touched by the request. And Andrew? Your father would be proud of what you're doing here today. For the first time since Harold's death, I saw my son stand a little straighter, his shoulders squaring with a confidence born not of entitlement, but of hard-won self-awareness. I hope so, he said quietly. I'm finally trying to be the man he believed I could be. The twins' enthusiasm was immediate and boisterous when I arrived at the apartment for dinner that Friday. Oliver grabbed my hand to show me his new bedroom, while Lily danced around us, interrupting with details her brother omitted. Dad let us pick the colors ourselves, Oliver explained proudly, showing off walls painted a vibrant blue. And we got bunk beds, so there's more space to play. I have the top bunk, Lily added importantly. Dad says I'm more coordinated, so I'm less likely to fall. The apartment, while certainly smaller than the mansion, was bright and pleasant. A corner unit on the 8th floor with large windows and an open floor plan. Andrew had arranged it thoughtfully, with comfortable but practical furniture and personal touches that made it feel like a home rather than a temporary arrangement. Family photos displayed prominently, the twins' artwork framed on the walls, bookshelves filled with well-loved volumes from the mansion's library. In the compact but functional kitchen, Andrew was putting the finishing touches on dinner. Nothing elaborate, just a simple roast chicken with vegetables, but prepared with evident care. The twins helped peel the carrots, he explained, catching my approving glance. We're working on expanding their culinary skills beyond microwave popcorn. Mom never let us help in the kitchen, Lily observed matter-of-factly. She said we'd make a mess or hurt ourselves. Well, a little mess is part of the learning process, I replied, handing her plates to set the table. Your grandfather used to say that the best meals come from kitchens where things occasionally go wrong. Like when Dad burned the garlic bread last week? Oliver asked with a mischievous grin. Andrew laughed, a relaxed sound I hadn't heard from him in years. Exactly like that. But we salvaged the spaghetti, didn't we? Dinner was a lively affair, with the twins eagerly sharing school stories and Andrew joining in with genuine interest rather than the distracted half-attention I'd often observed in the past. I noticed small but significant changes in his parenting. He listened attentively when the children spoke, established gentle boundaries when their energy became overwhelming, and referenced inside jokes that spoke of quality time spent together. After the twins went to bed, Andrew and I settled in the living room with coffee. Through the large windows, the city spread out before us, twinkling with lights that transformed ordinary buildings into a landscape of possibility. They seemed to be adjusting well, I observed, better than I expected, given all the changes. Andrew nodded. Kids are resilient, like you said, and honestly, I think they were aware of more than Samantha and I realized. The tension, the arguments, they felt it all, even when we thought we were hiding it. Children always know, I agreed. They might not understand the details, but they absorb the emotional atmosphere like sponges. They miss the mansion, Andrew admitted, the space, the garden, but they don't miss the walking on eggshells, the constant awareness of what might set Samantha off. He turned his coffee cup slowly between his palms. I don't think I realized until we left how much energy we all spent managing her moods. And how are you managing on the practical front? I asked. The daily logistics of work and parenting? I hired a part-time nanny, a graduate student who picks them up from school and stays until I get home from work. She's wonderful with them, studying early childhood education. He smiled faintly. The reduced role at work actually helps. Regular hours, less travel, more predictability for all of us. We talked about the challenges of single parenting, with me sharing stories of how I'd managed after Harold's frequent business trips during Andrew's childhood. The conversation flowed more easily than it had in years, unconstrained by Samantha's presence or the weight of unacknowledged tensions. As the evening drew to a close, Andrew broached the subject I'd sensed was coming. I've been thinking about the holidays, he began carefully. Thanksgiving is next month, and then Christmas. The twins are worried about how different everything will be this year. Without Dad, without the mansion, without... He hesitated, then finished. Without the family altogether. I understood the unspoken question. You're wondering if we might celebrate together? At the mansion? Andrew nodded, relief evident in his expression. If you're comfortable with it. Not moving back, of course, he added hastily. Just visiting, for the holidays. I considered his request, weighing my own emotional boundaries against the needs of the twins, and yes, against Andrew's evident efforts to rebuild what his passivity had damaged. Since reclaiming my home, I had been careful about who I invited in, protective of the sanctuary I'd reestablished. But family healing couldn't happen without carefully managed reconnection. Thanksgiving dinner at the mansion would be lovely, I decided. We could invite Diane as well. She's been such a support through everything. And perhaps Christmas Eve too, with the children staying overnight so they can wake up to presents under the tree in the morning. Andrew's face lit up with genuine gratitude. That would mean the world to them. To all of us. As he walked me to the door later, he paused, seeming to wrestle with something. I owe you an apology, he finally said. A real one, not just the vague expressions of regret I've offered before. What happened with Samantha, the way she treated you, the way I stood by and allowed it, was unforgivable. He met my eyes directly. I failed you as a son, failed the values you and Dad raised me with, and I'm truly, deeply sorry. The apology, so straightforward and unqualified, caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw in him the little boy who had once tearfully confessed to breaking a vase, refusing to let his nanny take the blame. A child with an innate sense of right and wrong that had somehow gotten buried beneath years of compromise and accommodation. Thank you, I said simply. That means a great deal to me. I don't expect immediate forgiveness, he continued. I know trust has to be rebuilt over time, through actions rather than words. But I want you to know that I'm committed to that process, however long it takes. On the drive home, I reflected on the evening, not just Andrew's apology, but the entire shift in our family dynamic. The mansion, once the battlefield where Samantha had declared ownership and attempted to exile me, would now become neutral ground for cautious reconnection. The holidays, which I had been dreading as painful reminders of Harold's absence, might instead become opportunities to forge new traditions that honored his memory while acknowledging our changed circumstances. Most striking was the change in Andrew himself. Without Samantha's influence, he seemed to be reclaiming aspects of his personality that had been submerged during their marriage, his natural warmth, his subtle humor, his capacity for self-reflection. The weak-willed son who had stood by while his wife evicted me from my own home was gradually being replaced by a man taking responsibility for his choices and their consequences. As I entered the mansion, my home, reclaimed and restored, I found myself thinking of Harold's letter again. Perhaps, freed from my shadow and faced with genuine consequences, he might finally grow into his potential, he had written of our son. It seemed, just possibly, that this growth was beginning to unfold, not because of gentle encouragement or patient understanding, but because of firm boundaries and clear consequences. Some lessons, it appeared, could only be learned the hard way. The thought brought no satisfaction, only a quiet recognition that sometimes love expresses itself not through endless accommodation, but through the courage to say, enough. The week before Thanksgiving brought the first real snowfall of the season, transforming the mansion's grounds into a winter wonderland that reminded me of Christmases past. As I supervised the staff preparing for Thursday's dinner, I found myself thinking of Harold, how he'd always insisted on bringing in the first Yule log himself, how he'd secretly placed small gifts around the house for me to discover throughout the holiday season, how he'd read "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" to Andrew and later to the twins with dramatic flourishes that delighted the children. This would be our first Thanksgiving without him. A thought that settled like a weight in my chest as I reviewed menu plans with Mrs. Chen, our longtime cook who had known exactly which dishes to suggest without my having to voice the question hanging between us. How to honor tradition while acknowledging what had changed. "Mr. Harold's favorite cornbread stuffing, of course," she said, marking it on her list. "But perhaps we try that cranberry compote with orange zest this year? Something new alongside the familiar?" I nodded, grateful for her intuitive understanding. "That sounds perfect." On Thursday morning, I woke early, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered lawn with golden light. The house was quiet but not empty, filled with memories and possibilities rather than echoing absences. I dressed carefully in a deep burgundy sweater Harold had given me last Christmas, pearl earrings that had been an anniversary gift, comfortable slacks that allowed for the practical work of hosting. The twins arrived first, bursting through the door with the exuberance only children can maintain in the face of complicated family dynamics. "Grandma, the house looks like a snow castle," Lily exclaimed, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Can we build a snowman after dinner?" Oliver added, already shedding his coat and boots in the entryway. "I don't see why not," I replied, accepting their enthusiastic hugs. "If it's not too dark by then. Otherwise, perhaps tomorrow morning." Andrew followed more sedately, carrying a bouquet of fall flowers and a bottle of wine. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. "The place looks wonderful." I had decorated simply but warmly. Arrangements of russet chrysanthemums and golden maple leaves, candles in Harold's favorite hurricane lamps, the good china, though not the disputed Limoges set, laid out on a table set for 5. Family photos, including several of Harold, were displayed prominently, a conscious choice to make his presence felt even in his absence. Diane arrived last, bearing her famous apple pie and a genuine smile. "Look at you, Eleanor Winters, hosting Thanksgiving like a woman half your age," she declared, embracing me warmly. Harold would be so proud. The meal itself was a delicate dance of old and new rhythms. We observed traditional elements, Harold's favorite stuffing, the carving of the turkey, the sharing of gratitudes before eating, while creating space for our altered reality. Andrew sat at the foot of the table where Harold would have been, not as a replacement, but as the family's most senior male member. I remained at my customary place at the head, a position I now occupied not just physically, but metaphorically as the family's center and leader. The twins kept conversation flowing with school stories and questions about Thanksgiving's past, their natural curiosity drawing out memories that brought smiles rather than tears. "Is it true that Dad once tried to deep fry a turkey and set the garage on fire?" Oliver asked, with the gleeful fascination children reserve for tales of parental mishaps. Andrew groaned good-naturedly. "That story is slightly exaggerated. It wasn't the whole garage, just a small fire that was quickly contained. Your father banned Andrew from unsupervised cooking for an entire year after that incident," I added, finding myself smiling at the memory. "He had to take actual cooking classes before he was allowed near the kitchen appliances again." "Dad's a pretty good cook now," Lily offered loyally. "His pancakes are way better than Mom's. She always burned them." A brief, awkward silence followed the mention of Samantha. It was the first time her name had come up, even obliquely, all day. Andrew cleared his throat. "Your mom is good at other things," he said diplomatically. "We all have different strengths. She's not very good at being nice to people," Oliver observed with the brutal honesty of childhood, especially not to Grandma. I exchanged glances with Andrew, seeing his discomfort, but also his unwillingness to silence his son with platitudes. This was new. The Andrew of a year ago would have immediately hushed such comments, regardless of their accuracy. "Relationships between adults can be complicated," I said gently. "Your mother and I had different ideas about certain things, but that doesn't mean you should think poorly of her." Diane, ever practical, deftly steered the conversation toward dessert, and the moment passed. But later, after the twins had gone outside to play in the snow under Diane's supervision, Andrew raised the subject again as we washed dishes side by side in the kitchen. a task he had volunteered for without prompting. "I'm sorry about Oliver's comment," he said, carefully drying a serving platter. "I've tried to establish that they shouldn't speak negatively about Samantha, but I also don't want to teach them to deny reality or pretend they didn't witness what happened." "It's a difficult balance," I acknowledged. "They're perceptive children. They saw how she treated me, how our relationship deteriorated." Andrew was quiet for a moment, methodically wiping another dish. "Have you heard from her at all?" I asked finally. "Not directly. Her lawyer communicates with mine about the divorce proceedings." He set down the dish towel, facing me with unexpected directness. "She's contesting the prenuptial agreement, claiming she was coerced into signing it and that the circumstances have materially changed since then." "Will she succeed?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. Andrew shook his head. "Lawrence says it's unlikely. The prenup was ironclad. Dad made sure of that. She'll receive the settlement outlined there, which is generous by any reasonable standard, just not enough to maintain the lifestyle she became accustomed to." "And the children?" "She's not contesting the custody arrangement we proposed. Primary physical custody with me, weekend visitation for her once she's established in Chicago." His mouth tightened. "Though last week she called to say she might not take them Thanksgiving weekend after all because she's attending some charity gala with her new connections there, first holiday after our separation, and she's already putting social climbing ahead of time with her children." The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable, but there was something else there too. A clear-eyed recognition of Samantha's priorities that had been missing during their marriage. He was seeing her now without the filter of justification and accommodation that had characterized their relationship for so long. "I kept making excuses for her," he continued almost to himself, "telling myself she was just stressed, or that her difficult childhood made it hard for her to show affection consistently, or that her social ambitions were ultimately for the benefit of our family." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "But the truth is simpler and harder to admit. She married the Winters name and everything it represented, not me. When that illusion fell apart, so did any pretense of commitment." The painful realization hung between us as we finished the dishes in companionable silence. Outside the kitchen window, we could see the twins and Diane building a lopsided snowman, their laughter occasionally carried back to us on the crisp winter air. "I've been thinking," Andrew said finally, drying his hands, "about what Dad used to say regarding wealth and its purpose. That money is like fertilizer," I recalled with a smile. "Only good when spread around to help things grow." Andrew nodded. "I'd like to establish trust funds for the twins, not the kind that create entitled adults who never learn the value of work, but the kind that ensure educational opportunities and a solid start in life." "That sounds like a wonderful idea," I agreed. "Lawrence could help structure it appropriately." Would you consider being co-trustee?" he asked, a vulnerability in his voice that reminded me of the boy he'd once been, seeking approval for a school project or sports achievement. "I trust your judgment about these things, about the balance between generosity and responsibility." The request touched me deeply, not just for the practical trust it represented, but for what it symbolized about our healing relationship. "I'd be honored," I said simply. As we rejoined the others outside, watching the twins put the finishing touches on their snowman, I felt Harold's absence keenly, but also his enduring influence. In the values Andrew was rediscovering, in the traditions we were adapting rather than abandoning, in the family bonds that had bent under pressure but ultimately held. This Thanksgiving, different as it was from all those that had come before, had given me something unexpected to be grateful for. The possibility that from the wreckage of betrayal and loss, something authentic and resilient might yet emerge. The mansion transformed for Christmas in the way it had for 4 decades under my direction. Tasteful but warm, elegant without ostentation, filled with traditions that had accumulated meaning through years of repetition. Fresh pine garlands draped the staircase banister, their scent mingling with cinnamon and cloves from the kitchen. The grand tree in the main living room stood 12 feet tall, adorned with ornaments that told our family story. The silver rattle that had been Andrew's first Christmas gift, the hand-painted globes Harold and I had collected on our travels, the increasingly sophisticated handmade creations the twins contributed each year. In the weeks since Thanksgiving, a new pattern had established itself. The twins spent every weekend with me, sometimes with Andrew joining us, sometimes with him taking those precious 2 days for self-care and personal regrouping. I had begun attending Oliver's basketball games and Lily's dance recitals, stepping into roles that Samantha had occupied more for social appearance than genuine interest. Andrew and I spoke almost daily, our conversations ranging from parenting logistics to business matters to deeper reflections on the changes in our lives. Samantha had indeed skipped her Thanksgiving visitation with the children, citing a can't-miss networking opportunity in Chicago. The twins had been disappointed, but not devastated, a telling indication of how peripheral she had already become in their emotional lives. She had, however, confirmed she would take them for the weekend after Christmas, her first visitation since the separation. The twins approached this prospect with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation that I monitored carefully, offering reassurance without undermining their relationship with their mother. Christmas Eve began with a light snowfall that dusted the mansion's grounds like confectioner's sugar, creating the perfect backdrop for the evening I had planned. Andrew and the twins arrived in the early afternoon, carrying